Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining me this morning. I know it's New Orleans, it's hard to get up in the morning. For those of you who may not know, I am from Canada, and thank you to Jim Nittenauer who gave me that yesterday. By the way, I don't think I need these here. It's just a hunch, but anyway. So, it's really great to be back here, and one of the things that I really enjoy is being able to actually give talks, not because oh, look, yeah, I'm up here talking. No, it's actually because I've been through a lot of things in my career and be able to share these with folks. So hopefully they can actually take something away and learn from it in such a way that helps them, is always my goal. If I can help one person in this room today, then I consider that a win. But in order to get to that win, I've had to fail a lot. So I'm going to be talking about failures of my own as well as others and as well as industry. And it's more not so much to point at saying, ha, you guys all failed. No, that's not it at all. The whole idea here is to actually look at it as this as being a teaching tool. And failure is an acceptable teaching tool if you learn from it. Years ago, a buddy of mine took me and he was like, okay, we're going to learn how to go ski. We're going to learn how to ski. I was 16 years old. I had never skied a day in my life. I'm like, yeah, sure. Get on our gear. We go up to the top of the mountain. He's like, okay, we're going to try this hill first. I said, oh, what's that black diamond mean? He goes, that's the Super Bunny Hill. Dumb enough as I was, I went, oh, okay, let's go. And I went over and I went down, and I'm going down the first half of the hill, and everything's going really well. I'm like, okay, this isn't so bad. Until we hit that first rise. I didn't know humans could actually fly. I flew, and I flew for a good distance. Thankfully, I landed in a pile of powder. But I looked at him and I said, why did you do that? He goes, because if you aren't falling down, you aren't learning. I was like, oh, okay, that's rather salient. And as we go along through our career, through our lives, we see all these different signs that are trying to show us, there's a set of rules that you have to operate by, and rules have consequences when they're broken. But as well, it's not that much of a problem to fail as long as you're learning from it. Now, when I was a kid, I was very much of the generation of kids should be seen, not heard. That didn't work out so well, much to my parents' chagrin. But, it taught me a lot of lessons. And now with my own kids, I'm going out of my way to make sure that they're immersed in all kinds of things, like playing with snap circuits, learning classical antiquity, things to that effect. Because I don't want them to grow up the way I did. I want to give them every opportunity. My parents did the best that they could with the tools that they had at the time. And inevitably, my kids will be sitting there years from now going, well, my dad screwed up because he didn't do this, this, and this. But to be fair, I'm doing what I can now. So, along came the 80s. And in the 80s, it was really interesting because this was really my first immersive experience into computers at all. And it was because my science teacher at the time had a computer in his lab. And, well, we discovered he had video games. So, awesome! So he would let us play video games at lunchtime during recesses. So my buddy Ryan and I was sitting there, we go playing away. And then we're like, oh, wait, there's 2 drives. What could we do with this? So we actually took those and we started duping games, and we may or may not have sold them to classmates. Made a tidy profit. But this was my first foray into it, and I went face first into it. But as things moved along, I discovered the Internet. And the Internet had all kinds of glorious things like dancing babies and what have you. But this was like the initial foray into it. And I really started getting into it as a career in around 1995, 96 time frame. Actually, I'm lying, 94. And it was really amazing to see the opportunity because I could look at this and say, okay, that web page took me forever to load, but I could see the opportunity. I could see the possibility. And it was really cool in that respect. And as we moved forward, I realized that I could break into systems and things like that. When I went to do my schooling after university, the college down here, it was amazing because I realized that in the team environment that we had, I could access all the other computers in the network. I could access the salaries of the staff that were teaching us. And it was like, oh, okay. And for me, it was an intuitive process. It was no super magical thing. It was just like poke, 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 see what would happen. And then we bring up to modern day, we go, oh, hackers are these guys and these girls. And it just frustrates me every time I see this sort of thing in the news. When you see somebody with thick gloves and a balaclava trying to type on a keyboard, I'm like, somewhere along the lines we failed because we didn't get ahead of the narrative. We didn't manage that for the wider audience. So the media went, okay, we're going to do this. And it was really frustrating. The only time I've ever used gloves typing on a keyboard was in a data center, and I still remember the cold because it got right to my bones. That was not a fun time. So when you look at these sort of imagery, this sort of imagery then translates into the modern environment. Like when I'm flying on a plane, if I'm sitting there with a hoodie and a pair of jeans and my laptop covered in stickers, the looks I get when people get on if I'm in business class, they're like, why are you sitting here? And then I just don't understand that frame of mind. But when you look at old pictures of flights back in the 50s and 60s, people would dress up nicely to fly on an airplane. That sort of went out the window. But this imagery of a hacker is really flawed because this is more of the imagery of a hacker. It could be anyone, and most of this room. And this is the reality of it, is it could be anyone, or even this guy. And I absolutely love this image because it actually reminded me of something. The first talk I was ever going to give by myself was back in 2012. And that was actually a talk that this one is based off called Falling on Swords, Lessons Learned. So, I was on the roster for Hackfest in Quebec City, and this guy was on the roster for Hackfest in Quebec City. And I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity. I was like, oh, I get to meet this guy, Jim Manico, all these other people. I look back at that list today, and it's really an amazing list. And then I realized, oh, wait, I missed my flight. So the fail about going to talk about my failures was rather poignant. And it was really interesting because I was absolutely terrified. To be entirely honest, I am abjectly terrified to stand in front of an audience at any given point. I'm not even making this up. The first talk I ever gave by myself was actually Source Dublin. I got up on stage. I think I lost about 30 pounds in sweat, and I was absolutely paranoid, but then I looked at the back, and there was Michelle Klinger at the back of the room giving me 2 thumbs up. And I was like, okay, wait a minute, I've got that framework of a community. There's people there rooting for me. And it really helped that that community was there. And then I remembered back to Hackfest in Quebec City, and they had created this, B-Sides Dave. So to put a little bit of backstory on that one, I was flying into Quebec City, and then because I was doing this on my own dime and I hadn't many dimes left, I was going to stay in the airport and fly out first thing the next morning. So they said, okay, a bunch of us are going to come and join you, and we're going to have B-Sides Dave. Since I didn't make it, they actually sent me all of the t-shirts that they made. This is why I realized that when we fail, there are community members there that are there to help you. And don't forget that. Because that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And as cliche as it may be to say this sort of thing, one of the things that Nietzsche talked about, and actually by that logic I'll live forever, one of the things that Nietzsche talked about was called the eternal return. Now, in his doctrine, the eternal return, the concept is that everything in the universe is recurring and will continue to do in perpetuity. Welcome to security. It's like the hamster wheel of pain that never stops. But we can change this. At some point, we have to collectively say, hold on, we got to stop doing the exact same thing. What's the definition of insanity? Can somebody give me that one? Exactly. Doing the same thing over and over again, waiting for a different result. Awesome. But with the law of eternal return, the idea here is that it keeps going, and we'll keep doing it over and over again. But what we can do is take that timeline, flip it on its head, and make that change. We don't have to accept data breaches of the fabric of reality because we see them. If you go and look at informationisbeautiful.net, and you look at the number of data breaches in their visualization from a year ago, and then look at it today, it's absolutely insane. There's not enough screen space left. It is just one big blur. And if we don't do things to change this, if we don't get in front of the narrative, things like this will continually happen. And if you have been living in a cave or under a rock, this is just from this past week, ransomware that spread across the internet called WannaCry. Now, the thing with WannaCry that I found really interesting is there's so many organizations out there that this is actually the first time they've ever encrypted their data. Not entirely what they had in mind, but This is a problem that could have been addressed years ago. SMP version 1 should not have been still available because you don't know when you're going to need that critical amount of data. And you got to make sure that you're taking the proper security controls to ensure that your systems are going to be up and running. But if you don't take these steps, you're going to end up with a Cartesian join. It'll go on forever. We'll keep doing the same thing over and over again. We will be the eternal return. And if we keep doing the same things wrong over and over again, and we don't learn from our mistakes, everybody's going to look at us like this. It's going to go from people are going to say, they're so tired of facepalming, they're just going to build statues. Failure is going to happen. And I'm not saying that go out and fail, but when you do fail, learn from that lesson. And when you learn from that lesson, share it with others. We are notoriously bad at going, no, it's my data, it's my information. And this is not something that's going to help push the narrative forward. One example is I saw a series of blog posts on don't be the fail or failure is not an option. I'm like, well, no, it's not an option so much as a reality. We're going to fail. It happens. I've failed more times than I care to count, and I've built a career on that. Because these things are going to happen. One of my earliest, and in retrospect now one of my favorite mistakes that I ever made was I was working for a defense contractor back in the 90s in Washington, D.C. Somebody was attacking one of our customer networks, and I got mad. I hit them back. I hit them back rather hard. I left a very nasty note on all of their systems, and then I retreated, and I had my coffee, and I was like, I got them. Next day, email waiting for me in my little inbox blinking light. I'm like, open that. Oh, wouldn't you know, I hit the wrong target. I had got 1 octet in the IP address wrong by 1 digit. And I was just wearing that. And to this day, I still whinge when I hear about that, or remember that rather, because it is a lesson that was hard to learn, but I did learn from it. And the funny thing is as I go through time, I realized I'm not the only one. For example, a few years back, I was at another company, and there was a vulnerability scanning vendor who will remain nameless, came to us and said, look, we really want to sell you this product. And we're like, well, never seen it before. Can I see some sort of demo? We'll scan your IPs for you. We'll do a discovery scan. Fantastic. Here's my Class B. And they're like, Class B? I said, that's all we got. We have several Class Bs. And they're like, all right, game on. They scanned the Class B, came back a day later, said, here's all the information. I said, fantastic. And he goes, you guys have a lot of problems on your network. I'm looking through. Why is there 300 printers on my network exposed? It doesn't seem right. Reading through. Some of the host names are in Chinese. Oh, shoot. They scanned the wrong block. So I had all this data for a block in China, and they were so embarrassed, but I said, don't worry about it. I've been there, done that. This is at that point where you have to go to your happy place. You have to realize that it's going to happen. You got to chill out, accept it, learn from it, and move on. And this slide is deliberately like this. Failure is not something to be afraid of. You don't have to sit there and worry about it, because it's going to happen, and it happens in all form of life, or all walks of life. Tacoma River Bridge is a really interesting example, and hopefully the volume doesn't go pop on this one, but we'll see. Okay, great. So this was a bridge, for those of you who don't know, in Washington State, where when they built it, they didn't account, let's not get feedback, they didn't account for all the different variables, and as a result, this happened to the bridge. They thought they had gone through and looked at all the information, all the data, and then brought it all in, but they missed a key piece of the puzzle. And as a result, this bridge ultimately collapses, and you'll see that in just a moment. Thankfully, the only fatality in this was a dog, and no humans involved in this one. But this was something that could have been avoided if they had taken the time to pull in all the information. And it's not to beat up on them. At the point in time, that was what they had available to them. But this is an example of when you're building your systems, when you're building your networks, you want to make sure that your networks are going to fail, but when they fail in such a way that you're going to recover. This, you can't recover from. This, when it goes down, you have to, well, you can recover. You got to rebuild the bridge in a different place. But this is one of those things where we have to actually look at it, that we're building our systems in such a way they are going to fail, and fail well. Netflix has their chaos monkey that'll randomly go through and down systems on their network. Fantastic idea. At Akamai, we have what we call the internet. And it is constantly testing us. Because as we go through these things, you have to understand that the idea of 5 nines is an antiquated concept. And as you go along, you realize that not everybody is going to understand that. Case in point, I was working for one company and I had a meeting with the manager for a bunch of developers. And this particular manager, I found something in one of their web pages in their web app where it had a commented out username and password. And I said, look, you got to take this out. This is public facing. This is no good. Change these, change everything. And he said, how did you know that? And I said, well, I went to view source. This view source, right here. And he said, what? I didn't even know that was there. How is that working? He goes, you hacked my system. I can't make this up. And I sat there like this. And I was just trying to wrap my head around. It's like, how am I actually having this conversation? And then it dawned on me. He's very good at what he's very good at. This is part of the puzzle that he didn't have. We never had that security conversation. So one of my failures was I had not articulated that to the developers that don't do this, this, and this. So I owned that one. And the one thing that I was very happy is I didn't shoot my foot off by saying, "What, are you some kind of idiot?" That would have got us nowhere. And you have to realize what's obvious to you is not necessarily going to be obvious to others. For example, one company that I left, and then I went to another job, and a week later, actually, no, it was actually closer to a month later, I got an email from a coworker at the old job and said, "You're not going to believe this." And he showed me this. This is a URL, which I've lovingly blocked out, from a site at a company I used to work at, and if you put equals Etsy password is available at the end, this dumped out to a web page. Let that sink in for a second. This was something they actually argued with me that it's not a problem. I was like, this was just one of many files that you could do this with. And you have to realize that when you're dealing with developers, it's not that they're not knowing what they're doing. It's just like you have to make sure you're articulating the position as a security practitioner as to what you expect from them. And they have to understand back and say, okay, we get it, and this is why this will work, or this is why this won't work. Because ultimately, humans do silly things. They will literally try anything you didn't think of. And they will say, oh, well, that's an awesome tool. I should put that up in my SOC. It's like, no, that actually is not going to give you any point of value. But as you're going along, you have to learn to be uncomfortable. Because if you are comfortable and in a daily routine where you're all happy, you're not going to advance. You're not going to grow. You're not going to learn. You want to be uncomfortable. You want to try things that you're not good at. Me, I can't stand being on a stage in front of an audience because it terrifies me. But I do it anyway because I've actually learned to turn it into a bit of an addiction. The energy rush is something else. So as you're going through your career and going through your life, you want to sit down and you want to reevaluate what you are trying to accomplish. What is it that you want to do in your career? Are you happy to just sit in a cube and do that all day to day and go home? Fine. All the power to you. If you want to grow and learn, don't take the set of data that you have learned at a point in time or a set of skills that you've learned at a point in time and accept that as that's it. Do you work for Plex? Damn, love that company. So you have to actually take that. And if you're going to learn, you have to go beyond what the boundaries of what you're comfortable with. What tools do you have in order to get there? And I don't mean Nmap and things like that. I mean, do you have the ability to understand the parties within your organization that you're working with? One of the best things that I ever did, and purely by accident, was I took a PMP certification. Not because of the certification, because of what I learned. I learned to think differently. I learned to think the way my adversary did, and when I say adversary, I have more than a few project manager pelts in my office at home. They always love to try and go around me. But this is one of those things where by taking the PMP, I actually learned what it was that was actually important to them so I could better articulate what I was trying to accomplish. And as you're going forward, examples like that, you want to build a solid foundation so that you actually have the ability to fail, but fail in a way that you're going to learn, the way you're going to grow, and not like what happened here at Lotus Riverside Block 7 in Shanghai, China in 2009. So one of the war stories that I want to go through, this is one of the really interesting ones, was I was at Black Hat one year, I think it was like 2006, And my second called me up and he's like, we got a problem. All right, what's the problem? Well, that consultant that we have for $2,000 a day, he's here. That's the problem? No, he's actually been sitting in his cube reading the manual for the last 3 hours. So we were paying this guy $2,000 a day to install a system that he hadn't even taken the time to learn. He showed up on site to read the manual in order to figure out how to put it on site. We were paying him to learn. This is where my head almost exploded. It did not end well for this particular contractor. But this is one of those things, is you want to make sure that you have your skill set ready to go before you go to a customer. Before you go into a business meeting, you have actually done your homework. You can't fly by the seat of your pants all the time. Things are going to go wrong. That's an inevitability. So rather than worrying about it and vexating about it, do something to actually address it. You want to be able to adapt. Now, the other thing that really gets me is whenever I travel, and I travel extensively with my current role, is I'll go to various different conferences and I'll meet people and they'll say, oh, I wish I could blog. I wish I could podcast. I wish I could write code. What are you waiting for? Literally, if you want to blog, go do it. There are all kinds of platforms. Nobody's stopping with it. Just be aware that there's an entire internet of people that are more than willing to contribute to their version of your particular post. So you learn to grow a thick skin very quickly. But this is not a bad thing. This is one of those things. It's part of growing. It's part of being uncomfortable. One of the best things I ever did is I wrote an article on liquidmatrix.org, the site that I run, and I took a position. And I got 2 different people taking swings at me. One of them ended up being Wendy Nather, and the other one was Alex Hutton. To this day, we're very good friends as a result of it. But they took a contrary opinion to me, and we went back and forth, and it actually ended up being a great discourse. All because I took a shot, I took a stand, and I said, this is what I'm going to look at. So when people come to me and say they don't know how to do this, they don't know how to do that, you really just have to take the chance. Because if you say it's not possible, I'll say, look at my field. When you're looking at the stuff today, one of the things that I was actually very lucky about is when I was working for a defense contractor and other things like that, we didn't have social media. We didn't have any of this sort of thing. Now, with social media and all the other different types of avenues of discourse, Slack, what have you, you can get lost and bogged down. And you have to be able to actually step away from that and actually sit down and articulate what you're trying to do for yourself, as well as for others. Because if you don't, we can actually spiral into very dark places because we get wrapped up in the drama that we see on social media. The drama is overrated. There's far more things to worry about than that. And if we get obsessed with the latest 0 day, meanwhile we haven't applied the Oracle bundle from 3 quarters ago, we're losing our focus. And you're going to miss these fine details. So here's an idea. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There are no stupid questions. I have plenty of dumb answers, but there are no stupid questions. One of the things that I did early on in my career is I would go on, with an anonymous account, I'd go on and ask questions that I didn't know the answer to, and I was absolutely shocked at how many people were willing to help. Invariably, there was at least one donkey. That always happened. But more often than not, people were willing to help. So if you're caught in a bind where you don't know the answer, besides Googling it, nobody ever says Bing it, but Googling it, look for the result. Sorry, Bing. But if you can't find it there, ask somebody. For those of you who might know James Arland, he's Mercurial on Twitter, he is my human Google. And when we were working together at a power company, if I didn't know the answer, I'd just shout over the wall, what is it? And he would come back at me and then get mad and storm off and come back and sit down again. He's like, why do you do that? You're easier to ask. He's a professional grump. I love him. But if you don't take the time to actually worry about how to do things properly, things like this happen. This is just from yesterday. This is a company that deals with securing data. And I'm not doing this to make fun of them. I'm doing this to point out this could happen to anybody. And this is one of the things you have to worry about. Because we all want to have security for ourselves. Here, you want that back? Okay, cool. We all have to worry about personal security. Like, if you go to work, if you go to school, and you come home and you find your door standing open and your place has been ransacked, that's a real sense of violation. We want to avoid that at all costs. So why can't we translate that into the organizations that we're working with or working for? That's one of those things where we have to take that and move it over to that so that we're actually doing a better job of working together. And when we're working together, you have a team, more than likely, in the place that you're working. You want to actually be able to rely on them. Yes, invariably, somebody's going to be a pain in the butt somewhere along the line in your career. But you got to learn to trust them. They have to earn your trust, and you have to earn their trust. And this is one of those things where you have to work through it because there is safety in numbers. And if you can rely on your team and build that team up into a cohesive unit, wherever that happens to be, you all win. It's not just about you. And if you think that way, that it is about you, this is usually what happens. You run aground. And it's simply easier to ask for help. As you go through your career and as you go through your education, whatever it happens to be, cut the tether of what you already think you know. Be able to ask the hard questions. Question what you learn. Not out of any sort of vindictiveness. If you get an answer and you're not entirely sure, ask. Question it. This is how we learn. We ask questions. I have an 8-year-old and, oh, actually she's almost 9, and a 3-year-old, and they ask me more questions than I care to admit, but this is how they learn. They adapt. They grow. And as we're going through that career and we're looking at these things and we take those preconceived notions away and learn to ask the questions, we have to find that balance. We have to strike a balance. One of the things that I did is, where is this one? I knew one friend of mine who his travel was 90 to 100% for his security job. He had no life outside of his job. If he happened to get laid off for whatever reason, he'd be left holding nothing. Sure, he could get another job, no problem, but this was his entire world. Is this what you want for yourself? Well then, all the power to you, but humans tend not to want just that one thing. You want to be sure that you're planning. You want to make sure that you're not a gambler. If you're one of those people who say, let's see what happens when I do this, that's fine, as long as you're recording what you learn. Because if you are going through and you're doing a pen test on a system, and you're trying different things, if you're not recording what you did when something goes wrong, you can't go back and go, oh, that's where that went wrong. In one particular organization I was at, we had pen testers come in and they were doing stuff internally. They put in an Nmap scanner and let it run overnight. Logic would dictate that that would have been fine. Apparently, on certain power systems, if you scan them with a SYN scan, and it hits a lock D daemon, this is going back 20 years now, if you hit the lock D daemon, it tends to panic, and then a cascade failure right up the stack and takes the whole system down. I didn't plan that one. I gambled and thought it would be fine. So I stood up in front of my boss and I said, I take full responsibility for this. I didn't tell them it was not okay. I said, go for it. And the boss looked at me and he goes, you do that again, you're fired. Fair. But he knew that I had fallen on my sword and I had taken the hit because it was my mistake. It wasn't the pen tester's mistake. I never thought to say, maybe this isn't such a good idea with these incredibly flaky systems that are keeping the lights on. So if you have a solid plan, it gives you a leg up. It really helps you in the long run that you actually take the time to plan out where you want to go. And every time you go into a job interview, it's like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I always hated that. But actually, there is some sound advice there. It's like, where do you want to go? What do you want to be when you grow up? I'm still trying to figure that out. So when you have that foundation in place, you want to take chances. Because this is how you get ahead in your career. If you do the same thing every day, over and over, forever, it's entirely possible that you will get grumpy and irritable, or maybe that's something you enjoy. But if you don't take these chances, you're not going to grow. You're not going to learn new opportunities. You're not going to advance. One example is I was working at a financial institution in Toronto in the 90s, and I went down to a training session in Texas for the Wheel Group. I don't know if anybody remembers that. They were bought by Cisco. They had the NetRanger IDS product. Yes, I'm old. And we started flirting via breaking into each other's systems in the lab, and little did I know years later that Cisco actually captured all of that and used it as part of their teaching process for their courses in the future. Fantastic. But anyway, we got together, we started dating, and she goes, one day, why don't you move down with me? So I moved down to Charleston, South Carolina, And I thought, oh, this is great. Packed up my life, got a job with a defense contractor there, I'm flying down. I was single before the plane hit the tarmac in Charleston. And I was crushed especially because I had to live with her for 3 weeks before my apartment was ready. That was awkward. But in so doing, it's like I made the conscious decision to stay there because I had taken this leap. I had gotten a new job, and damn, it was a fantastic opportunity because I did work with the U.S. Department of Defense. I did work with the FBI and all kinds of other organizations I never imagined I would have been able to do because I had taken that leap. And you have to understand that it's not always going to work out, but if you don't take that chance, you're not going to know. As you're going through, you have to understand that failure is going to build success ultimately, as long as you're learning from the mistakes. Back in the day, if somebody had not told me, if you type $bang, this entire mainframe is going to go down, and somebody goes, hey, why don't you type this and see what happens? Which almost happened. Luckily, I was aware, but somebody had taken the time to teach me that sort of lesson. If you do that, the whole system is toast. And these are the kind of stories that I like to share, this sort of information, these things that I've learned, because it led to things like this. Now, back in the early 90s, I found a couple articles about security, and I took them into the office, and folks in the office were like, this is awesome. Where'd you get this? I couldn't find this anywhere. Because Google wasn't really even a thing yet. And so I was like, okay. And I stood up liquidmatrix.org to share information. And it grew. And at one point, in early 2000, 2001 timeframe, I had in my logs IP addresses from all of the militaries in the world, all of the various police organizations. It was actually a who's who of everything. It was awesome. Nowadays, not so much. But it was a great thing to be able to share this sort of information, and it continues today. We have a podcast and things like that where we're able to share this information, and there's 10 or 12 of us now that are actually working on this. And to remove any specter of doubt, we had actually taken the time to strip out all of the advertising. So as of December 2016, we just removed all of that so that people realized we were just giving our unfiltered opinions. Now, that was the unintended consequence. That was something that I started purely as an altruistic endeavor that grew into something that a lot of people have been able to get benefit from, and I'm really happy about that. Sometimes an endeavor doesn't go so well, like the Morris worm. The Morris worm really got me because in this particular case, this was an example of a piece of code that got out of its cage and caused a lot of trouble, but I think this is really the birth of firefighting for security folks. This is where it all sort of went squiffy. We tend to actually obsess about the firefighting and less about the strategy. Because we always see our day jobs as us versus them. Or at least I did for a long period of time. And when you're doing this, you have to realize that you're getting yourself stuck into a binary response mechanism. You don't need to be there. You can do much better than this. You are better than this. Because if you do that, you end up aligning against yourself. And we are very good at becoming our own worst enemies. We're pretty juvenile as an industry, and I don't mean that as a juvenile and puerile. I mean we're young. Law, the legal profession, medical profession, they've been around forever. They have defined repeatable processes. This is something we are just coming into the understanding. This is where we're getting to our enlightenment phase, as it were. Because if we don't arrive at that, crap like this will continue to happen. If anybody don't remember this one, this is when CNN came on and said, a hacker named 4chan broke in and stole all these pictures of these celebrities. This was one of my fantastic moments there. So, a couple of war stories. One of the things that I was taught early on by one of my mentors, David Anderson, he pulled me aside and he said, you have to learn to let go. I thought, what on earth are you talking about? For the systems in the security practice at our organization, I had this for all the boxes. These were my systems. You can't touch them. Patch management folks, you can't touch them because I thought I was doing a better job. Turns out I was, but that wasn't the point. I wasn't able to move on in my career. I wasn't able to develop because I couldn't let go. And when I let go and I gave that system over to other folks in our team, it turned out that they needed 3 people to run the systems that I was running by myself. And I realized I had been overdoing it to a rather large factor. And this is not the way it needs to be. Because I was able to let go of those systems, I was able to look at new problems, new ideas, new things to work on. And I was able to grow. Now this is a really interesting story. This was something that drove me absolutely bonkers. one company I was working at, we were in the process of replacing all the firewalls for our organization. This was a global organization. One of the things that we were just getting ready to roll these new firewalls out across the globe, and we got some nasty grams from Rio. And I couldn't understand why the recording industry was coming after us and the movie industry was coming after us, because they were claiming we were downloading all kinds of cracked movies. We couldn't find any trace of this in any of our information. So our guy on the ground in country X went to put in the new firewall, and he noticed something. This was literally 3 days after all this transpired. He noticed there was a cable that was split off the edge router coming into the network to a separate firewall. A firewall that we did not own, control, or was even a brand we were using. It was something from a Best Buy type of purchase. And we're like, this is incredibly weird. So we were able to get into the system because luckily whoever set it up thought that the default credentials was a good idea. So folks in this office were in such a mood to download cracked movies, they had actually built their own stub network. They were downloading hundreds and hundreds of cracked movies. Why? Because they thought they could. This was a failure on our part because we were not properly monitoring the edge routers. We were looking at the firewalls. We weren't looking at the edge routers. We weren't looking to see what was coming into the network. And this was a real problem. We learned from that one. Another mistake that came through was one company I was working at. We had a WordPress installation that was a little bit dated on a platform that was dated. And we looked at it and we said, okay guys, it was a marketing type thing. We said, look, you need to take this system offline because it is out of date and this could cause problems. They're like, you know what, sure, no problem, we'll take it down tomorrow. That's fantastic. 3 weeks later, we're on the front page of several major news publications because such and such company got hacked. And we're like, what are you talking about? Turned out, they never took the system down. There were major WordPress vulnerabilities in this particular site. The mistake was mine. And I own that mistake because I trusted them to take it down. I didn't confirm that they did. And this was a hard lesson that I learned to trust but verify. We ended up on the front page, but luckily that system wasn't tied into any back-end systems. They had actually disconnected any back-end functionality. So the damage was minimal, but the reputational damage was significant. And this sort of thing will pop up where you least expect it. In another organization, we were having this weird networking loop that we couldn't quite get our hands on. We really couldn't figure out what it was that was happening. So, off to the data center we went. I got the tile lifter, started popping tiles. We're looking for a cable. We're trying to trace the root of the problem. And then I went, pulled it up, took a step back, said, oh, that's neat. Everybody around me realized that that was not a good thing. The call came around, we all looked at it. There, under the floor, blinking back at me, was a Cisco router. Nobody knew what this router was. Now, this company that I was working at was originally part of a much larger organization that was split into 5 separate companies. Our company and one other company that were split out were roughly competitors in that regard. This was a connection to their organization. This was something that predated all of us as being separate companies, but luckily nobody knew it was there. The only reason we knew it was there because something went wrong with the routing. This is one of those things where these are failures that we need to learn from. And because there was no proper documentation, nobody knew this router was there. Nobody knew. So as we're going through and learning from our mistakes, learning from our victories, and we're documenting all of this stuff, we have to share the lessons that we learn. And I hammer at this one incessantly because I'm getting older. The more gray hair I get, that means the closer I get to sitting on a beach and just chilling out and saying, I'm done. But my knowledge set, along with everybody else in my age group and beyond, that could be gone if we're not properly documenting this information to share with the younger generations that are coming in. Like, we used to have to sit there and tear apart how DNS works. Now people come in and be like, oh, I clicked the button next. And it's like, no. That fundamental understanding is missing for a lot of younger folks coming into the industry, and we have to get down to the basics and the fundamentals again. Now we fail, and we learn from that, and we grow into a posse. But the one really interesting thing is, and I never thought I would get a moment of zen from a Marvel film, but this really hit me. It's not about you. It really is about all of us together. We are all in this together. Each of us have a different function. If you're a pen tester, if you're a policy wonk, all of us are part of the same team. And we have to get over these little fiefdoms that we have and start working together in a much better fashion, because otherwise we are never going to get off the eternal return. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I greatly appreciate your time today. Any questions? Oh, put them all to sleep. All right, thanks a lot.